It's suitable.
Anyway, so like a lot of people here, I've been able to meet some fascinating people around the world, but usually most of the people that I meet, the more powerful they are, they got there because of sociopathic behavior. And to find someone who actually remembers that everyone at the top is only at the top because of everyone who lifts them up there, and therefore you have a personal responsibility to everybody that is part of that entity, and therefore you have to make your choices understanding that entity, is a very rare thing to do. And when you do find them, to find someone who's been able to make their millions for a company and for a community without sacrificing that integrity is an extraordinary human being. And I'm very proud to say that Jim Keyes is one of those people. And before I had any clout in this city, at one time I wanted to try and help Haiti. I didn't have anything to be able to. He took my phone call, and unfortunately something kept it from happening. But over the years, I've learned that when push comes to shove, if you really want to make that difference, Jim steps up. And not always because somebody has clout that they can give to him. He's ended up going out of his way to help so many people in our community. I'm going to acknowledge Thomas Johns here, who is one of the most brilliant people developing an AI within the Memnosyne Institute. And he and I have been friends, and he's worked with the Memnosyne Institute. And it was only about like 3 years into it we realized he was also a mentee of Jim's. So it's amazing how Jim goes out of his way to find people that have that kind of positive trajectory and help him get further. And one of the reasons why Jim does that is because people helped him move further, and he remembers that and he pays it forward. So I'm so excited. I made sure to bring one of these in here so people can actually see it. This is Jim's new book. So without further ado, we're going to share some of these amazing stories. How many times do you meet someone who's been the CEO of not just one, but two big name companies, 7-Eleven and Blockbuster, and not just stopped at that, but then taken everything he learned and applied it to say, how can we help humanity? And is doing exactly that. So, Jim, I really enjoyed reading your book, and one of the things I would love people here to know, because some people began making their fortunes from the beginning with nothing. Some people inherited it. Some people are somewhere in the middle. Can you tell people about your beginnings and how it formed and shaped you?
Sure. I grew up in a very humble way that people laugh now and they say, what do you think, you're Abraham Lincoln or something? Because I literally grew up with no running water, pump outside, outhouse, central Massachusetts. You get 40, 50 miles west of Boston and it gets really rural really fast. People forget that. And we were just typical of many families in America. Too many kids, not enough money, had all kinds of adversity, but it turned out that adversity that I had as a child, I didn't realize was the best thing that ever could have happened to me, because it gave me an incredible amount of strength, independence, a focus on the importance of education and learning. And I'm still doing it today. I'm still committed to lifelong learning, and I'm trying to pay it forward, as Mary Ann said, to help others understand how critically important it is to do what the subtitle of the book, The Future is in Your Hands, literally, for individuals and for society as a whole. So that's my mission.
Thank you. One of the things that really came across in your book was how you talk about education in terms of what we all tend to think of, getting your degree, getting your high school diploma, get special, but you also talk about wisdom. And throughout the book, you both emphasize going and learning how to do something. I mean, this is a man that when he was helping 7-Eleven to reconfigure itself out of bankruptcy, he was having to go and literally learn the academic side as he was making decisions, doing it all simultaneously. And at the same time, you were also open to wisdom, and you go so deep into that and applying it to how you made your decisions. Can you expand on that?
Sure. Well, what Mary Ann hasn't told you is that one of my mentors, I was very, very fortunate throughout my life to have really good mentors, and probably the most important in my life happened to be her dad, John P. Thompson, who was a man of wisdom. And as I was working on the book, I intended originally to write the book for young people, and it's a roadmap for learning. So it's kind of what to learn and how to learn. And then I was encouraged to add the why. Why is it so important? Why is learning so important? And I started to step back and look at society overall, and you know, I know some really smart people who do some really stupid things, right? We all do. And then you look at what's going on in society today and you go, oh my gosh, what's happening? I mean, why can't we fix some of these problems? They're not that hard. I mean, if we could figure out how to work together. And so I sort of channeled what John P. Thompson would say, because he was a man of wisdom. And I started looking at the whys. And I captured 3 whys in the book for learning and for the importance of learning. And the first is collaboration, because we all grow up in our early years being independent performers. We're like professional golfers, not hockey players, right? We don't rely on anybody else to get a good grade in spelling when we're in grammar school. But then we reach a point in life when we have to work with others. My first experience was in graduate school and business school, and I was thrown into a case study, and I said, oh, I don't want my grade to depend on these turkeys. I got this far doing it myself. I don't need anybody else. And then I realized, wait a minute, this is an accounting class. I have never had an accounting class in my life, and I'm sitting next to guys with a CPA from Deloitte. Oh, one of them's in my case study. Oh, okay. He's okay, I'll accept him. And then I started feeling like I don't have anything to contribute, and yet it turned out everybody in my case study had pretty good accounting background, and they were very technical, but since I didn't, I brought creativity to it, and we ended up doing a really creative solution to factoring balance sheets that helped us get an A on the case. Nice. So I actually contributed through creativity, knowing nothing about accounting. It was a great example of the power of collaboration. The second C that I use in my, I've got all C's, I have 9 C's in this, try to keep it simple and memorable. The second C is to the why of learning was cultural literacy. And you know, the word diversity today is just getting abused. It's sad. Turn on the radio and somebody said, DEI is DOA. I think it was on one of the news channels. And I was going, you know, what? How do you take a word like diversity and turn it around and make it bad? I mean, you gotta really work at that, right? So I learned at a very early age, you learn from your mentors, and I saw John Thompson doing business in other countries, doing business right here in the United States, and never, ever, I could never see any sense of bias or anything but openness and welcoming to anyone from any socioeconomic circle, any race, any religion. I just saw him behave that way. And I realized that and this is before DEI or anything. John was way ahead of his time, as you know, Mary Ann. But what he had was a heart. And he was a very confident man, but he knew that he could learn from everyone he encountered. And you felt that when he would be with you, you could feel that he had something to learn from you, and he knew it, and he valued your opinion. So in trying to analyze how do I address this important characteristic for success in my book, I called it cultural literacy. And the way I've characterized it is, I can be as confident as I want, but I will stop short of arrogance if I know that I have something to learn from everybody I encounter. It doesn't matter how confident I am. If I can learn from you and take a little bit of you with me, then I personally become a patchwork quilt of the good of everybody I've encountered through my whole life. And it will make me a more interesting person too. So that cultural literacy, I think, is such a fundamental part of why. And then finally, in the last C of the 3, I called character, and you talk about character. John Thompson was a man of impeccable integrity. You knew when he told you something, you could count on it, put it in the bank. Humility, gratitude, very thankful person. Compassion toward other people. And those are the things, the way I characterize in the book, those are your brand. Those are the things that people see when they see you. And we all know brands, right? When we grab a cola, we pick up either a Coke or a Pepsi because we know what's inside. And we might pass on an unbranded product because we don't know what's in it. And that's what character is for us individually, and why it's so critically important, because it's our brand. And so those are the three elements of why learn, because we live in a world that requires collaboration for success. You won't be successful unless you surround yourself with people that are not just like you, because you'll be better together in collaboration. And then finally, the character that you project to others, the character that you live, is what makes your brand successful. And those whys, I think, separate people who have wisdom from just people who have knowledge. And I don't know, for what it's worth, I think your dad was a living example of that.
Thank you. You know, one of the stories you mentioned about my father, which I think that a lot of people would also resonate, and those who are standing there, please, there's plenty of places to sit over here. But one of the things, by the way, Deanna Wheeler was the one who was playing the music earlier.
Yeah, great.
She's also someone who served in the Air Force twice in Afghanistan, so we all owe her being a wonderful veteran. But anyway, one of the things that you mentioned in the book that really got me thinking was you talk about a moment you had with my father in which you were worried about how someone was losing business, and how he pointed out that originally had been an ice company, and then they had to realize, no, we were a convenience store company. And while you were looking at it from a specific thing as a corporation, you realized what he was actually teaching was we sometimes get mired in one thing, but seeing what a problem is from an eagle-eye perspective allows us to redefine it. And I think that is so powerful. I'd like for you to share how you moved on to apply that to Blockbuster and other things.
Sure, it's a beautiful story. We actually, I talked about change, and crisis sometimes causes change. People don't like change. Well, we had very unfortunate timing of a leveraged buyout in 1987. We took on $4 billion of debt at 16.5%. And when the market crashed on Black Monday in '87, it's just one of those things. It was the right strategy, the right thing to do, and the market collapsed all around us. And I was a relatively young guy. By 1991, the company was in some trouble, and they were going to have to probably file for a restructuring. And I went to John. I just told Mary Ann tonight that he had one of the coolest things that he ever did as a leader. He'd go to the office on Saturdays, and he'd look around and see who was in the parking lot. And then he'd pick up the phone and say, "Hey Jim, I'm going over to Fousey's." Those of you from Dallas, remember Fousey's? Down on McKinney? He said, "I'm going over to Fousey's for lunch. Clark and I have gone over, come on." And he'd take a bunch of us who was ever working. And so I'd go to work on Saturday just for the privilege of getting that call from John. And he thought I was a hard worker. No, I wanted to have lunch. It was awesome. But so one day at Fousey's, I think it was, I said, "John, what should I do?" He was took me under his wing very much as a young professional. And I said, I'm pretty young still. I came to this company thinking we were going to be successful. New York Stock Exchange, just unlimited growth. Now we're looking at maybe bankruptcy. People saying we're going to go away. What should I do? And he told me this beautiful story that literally I still tell all the time today, and helped change my career course too. Because he said, Jim, my dad, classic Texan, right? He said, "I'll tell you what my daddy told me." He said, we started in 1927 over in Oak Cliff, just down the street on 12th Street. We had an ice house. We used to mine ice. We would ship ice down from the north and store it underground so people could have it for their ice box. And then in about 1928, somebody invented something called a Frigidaire. He said, "What do you think that does to your business?" I think we're in trouble now. He said, "That's all we sold, is big blocks of ice." And he said, but his Uncle Johnny Green started talking to customers, saying, what do you want? What else? You're not going to come anymore because you now have a Frigidaire. And they said, "Well, we didn't come for the ice. We came for the convenience of getting the ice here." So why don't you sell us other things that we need conveniently for our icebox? And he said, and it transformed the company. It was the birth of the first convenience store. Literally, they started selling bread and milk, and they already had plenty of ice to keep it cold. So they adapted. They changed. They responded favorably to change. And he said, now, dial forward, it was 1991. We had a pretty tough period of about 10 years of same-store sales declines that were caused by, we had a whole lot of new competition. Everyone was open 24 hours. People were selling beer and soft drinks, the same things we were selling. And he said, we've kind of lost sight of what people need conveniently. So your job, should you choose to stay, find what next people want conveniently. He said, it's all over the world. And he started showing me in places like Thailand or Japan, how about this product? Wouldn't that be cool back in the United States? And literally, I adopted that premise that change isn't bad. Change can be the best thing ever, even if it's really hurts at the time, a financial disaster, right? You can come out on the other side better and stronger. So I've coined the expression, John would love this actually, I coined the expression in the book that the role of a CEO, and he was CEO at the time, is change equals opportunity. That acronym, change equals opportunity, if you really believe that, I don't care if it's your personal life, your community, or your corporation, if you can, and what it comes down to, one last thing, it's not the change that matters, because change is the only constant. It's always going to happen. The origins of commerce came from change. Somebody responded, and they made money on it. So it's not the change, it's the response to change. And if we can manage our response to change in a favorable fashion, keep our head up and see it as opportunity rather than be a victim or blame somebody or be depressed about it, that's the secret to success. That's what separates winners from losers.
Thank you. One of the other people you talk about in your book that made such a strong impression for you is your father. And I really loved what you talked about when you said, what is freedom? You know, people often think freedom is money, freedom is, very easy, but you really emphasize the idea of freedom is the ability to choose what you're going to do, when you want to do it, where you want to do it. And the link between that and education, and I think that is so powerful. Could you tell them that story?
Sure, well, I mentioned to you, we grew up pretty poor, but I didn't know we were poor. I actually thought we were rich because we had my dad, to supplement his factory job, he would take junk cars and put them in the yard, and then on weekends he would strip the metal and go load up a truck and take it to sell the scrap metal, just to make some extra cash. So we had all these junk cars in our yard. Well, the kids from the wealthy side of town, like any town, we had a north and a south, and the other side of town, those kids wanted to come and play in my yard because we had junk cars. And we had nobody to supervise us because my mom bailed when I was like 5 years old, and my dad didn't care. He was out working on a junk car, so we had nobody to supervise us. So we were free, right? And now they were rich, but I was free. And it was really a great lesson. It was like, money doesn't really matter. It's fine. It's comfortable. Helps you. But really, what it's all about is freedom, and that's what my dad used to teach me. He would say, son, I don't want you to have to work this hard. I don't want you in the factory like I am, because I don't have the freedom to do the things I'd like to do. I'd love to travel the world. In World War II, he was in Burma, on the Burma Road, and he was fascinated with the cultures, the Asian cultures, and used to share those stories with me. He said, I want you to travel the world and do great things, but you can't, I don't know how to tell you what to do. But I think somewhere in those books is the answer. And the more you study, the more you can do that. And now what I tell kids today, we're all caught up in the money train, on the hamster wheel, that I gotta make money, and we've got people telling young people, just go get a job, make $100,000 being whatever. But it's so short-sighted because it's not about money. It's about the more you learn and the more options you have, the more you can do, the more freedom you have to change career paths, right? You started out at Google, awesome career path. decided to bag that and be a journalist and help other people. I mean, what an amazing example of you have more freedom than somebody sitting in a cubicle at Google hunting out code, right?
It's the definition of golden handcuffs.
It is, exactly. But you've got to free yourself from, I mean, money is, I'm not saying money's not important, I love it. It's an enabler, but it's not the end game. The end game is to have the freedom to do whatever you want to do.
Thank you. One of the other things that you emphasize in the book when you talk about freedom is the freedom in terms of mentality, and how while we're being given so much technology, so many ability to do things in the world today, many people are getting almost increasingly less free. And yet the ability to have discernment, the ability to be able to understand when someone's trying to pull the wool over our eyes and know what's real and what's not real and make decisions that are empowering decisions, rely on that education to be able to know the difference. Can you go into that?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to that question of how are really smart people getting themselves wrapped around the axle, working so hard that they're miserable and unhappy. I don't know, we all have some really wealthy friends who are miserable. You know, I remember one story I'll share with you. I was working for the American Red Cross I sat on the board for years, and we were in this little village in Thailand. And we walked up, and it was just the most amazing village, dirt huts, dirt floor huts and everything. And I was with a couple of board members and one really wealthy lady that was with me. She said, "Oh, this is just pitiful. Look at these miserable people. They're just," and she was crabby the whole trip. She's complaining about the mosquitoes, the food, and she's just miserable the whole time. She had more money than God, but she was miserable. And she'd wear diamonds and all this stuff. People are looking at her in places from Mars. Because we're out in the wilderness, out in Thailand, in the middle of nowhere. And the one thing that struck me is these people came running up to us. They had never seen a Westerner. They had joy. Every one of them was filled with joy. There was no grumbling. There was no miserable. And what I saw is people that were free because they let themselves be free in their minds. They were happy. So it's one of those things that it starts inside with each of us to allow ourselves to not get caught up in all of those things and to have that discernment, understand when someone is telling us something, why they're telling us, to have that critical thinking and reasoning and curiosity to dig deeper so that we can not get caught in the trap.
Thank you. And I love that you're taking so many of these lessons and so many of these experiences, things that someone would only experience as the CEO of a major corporation and with the life trajectory that Jim has had. But how you're taking these very unique life experiences and putting them into a foundation to try and get this to other people. Can you expand on how you're doing that?
Yeah, to me it's critical because I see so many people caught in the trap. And it's all across the board. I see young people. At 7-Eleven, we had a lot of first-generation Americans. And we didn't even realize this until 9/11, and then all of a sudden we started getting bricks through windows, and I was, oh, why is that? And why, I kind of, it was fear-based, basically. People were afraid, and they were taking their revenge out on people that didn't look like them. But it was a wake-up call for us because we were like, why do we have so many first-generation Americans? And then we realized we're kind of the American dream. Because people would they'd come with a degree often and very little money, and rather than work for someone else, they could be their own boss in the 7-Eleven. They'd bring family members over and work, and then the first thing they would do is send them to school, and they would expand their operations and buy another franchise. And I said, well, why isn't that why don't our kids in South Dallas, why aren't they looking at that as that kind of opportunity? Yeah. Let's create that for them. So we created a foundation at 7-Eleven, and we went into the public schools. 20 years later, we've had some 500,000 kids come through this program where what we do basically is just provide a counselor in each school, because the current guidance counselors are busy dealing with crises for the most part. They don't have time to talk to kids about opportunity, and you can go to college, you can do this, here's the path, that kind of thing. So that's kind of how it started, and it's just a desire. And if I could do it, I figured anybody could do it. And why do I sit here and see all this loss of potential when so many people can do so much? You've just shown the path, so I'm trying to show them the way.
Well, you definitely help people reach for the stars in major ways, and speaking of which, you also do a lot of work with astronauts, and you're also a pilot yourself. Can you expand on some of that and how you've been linking your passion as a pilot with some of these astronauts at Buzz Aldrin and how you're linking that into what your work and outreach? Because I think that's fascinating.
I gotta share something with you. This is just so cool. I just have to share this. Margot, what do you think? It's my wife, Margot, right here.
Whose hand I've been very, very impressed by. You have not moved that phone 1 inch.
I have not. This is one of the first talks I've actually been able to enjoy. Because I don't usually get the luxury of being sitting here like this, but this is great.
By activities on St. Patrick's Day, but I noticed that it's your birthday.
This is Buzz Aldrin. Called me yesterday.
Have a great birthday party.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
On your way, and when you get back, we'll chat just a little, see what you're up to. I'm just trying to keep up with you, a little bit older.
Buzz is 95, 94, 95.
You need to tell them who Buzz Aldrin is, because some people may not know who Buzz Aldrin is.
Buzz was the, I'm going to say he's the first man on the moon, but he would say he and Neil were the first men on the moon.
Neil Armstrong.
He gets really annoyed when people say he's the second man on the moon. He's like, wow, loud, like 3 minutes, you know. I gotta spend the rest of my life being called the second man on the moon. But yes, it's a privilege. The reason that my friendship with Buzz and Charlie Duke and a number of these Apollo astronauts is so special to me is that I was literally at Boy Scout camp during the Apollo mission when they were walking on the moon. I was at a leadership training program, watched them walk on the moon, and these were regular guys. These for the first time in my life, I was able to see guys like me that didn't come from any fancy background, but they worked really hard and they studied really hard, and they were able to do amazing things. And then, so it inspired me as a kid, partly because I didn't know what else I wanted to do. I said, I want to be an astronaut. Well, I fell short of being an astronaut. I still fly today because I did have a passion that started back then for aviation. But dial that forward, and about 25, 30 years ago, I guess it was, I was privileged to be inducted into an organization that Buzz got into, called the Horatio Alger Distinguished Americans Organization. And here I was on stage with Buzz Aldrin, and I was like starstruck. I was like, my gosh, you're the guy that was my hero. But I was able to thank him on stage for being the thing that inspired, the spark that inspired me to, as a child, to study. And so since then, we've been buds for the last 25, 30 years, something like that. And it's just such a privilege, I can't tell you.
That's a much more elegant way of being Buzz. I met him dancing at Rayford's around it was a stripper pole they put in the club after the blues ball, and I can tell you Buzz Aldrin can dance.
Oh yeah.
He can dance better than some 20-something-year-olds.
Oh yeah.
So that was how I met him.
I bet you really likes you too.
So tell him that I remember him from Rayford's. I'm like, oh dear. But so tell me, as you've been meeting all these people, and as you've been serving as CEO of these corporations, and as you created your foundation and you continue to travel and meet fascinating people, one of the things I would love, because we do have some state representatives here tonight, we have a veteran here, we have, Reverend Todd Collier, who oversees the food source program, and, there's so many different people here who are doing great work. What would you suggest to them when they're coming face to face with an increasingly divided country? Because I found that in your book, you had words that could appeal to people whether you are MAGA, whether you're extremely progressive, whether you're moderate. And I think that one of the most beautiful aspects of this book is that you bring people together and offer a bridge of hope where they can meet.
Well, thanks. Yeah, that was a really hard thing to do, to walk down this middle, because I knew if I just stepped 1 millimeter over the line, I would take 50% of the country, and they would put the book aside and say, oh, this person is this or that. So I tried desperately to walk down that line. So I did a lot of research about this to try to understand what is it that's dividing us as people. Why do my dear friends get to the point we can't even discuss what's going on in the country because they get mad and they think I'm some wackadoodle or something because I don't agree with their point of view. What's causing this? And as I researched it and think about the inconsistency of knowledge, because these are smart people. These are not dummies. They're incredibly intelligent folks who can't agree on a basic solution to a fundamental problem. As I started researching, I went all the way back to the ancient Greek philosophers, and they had some incredible insight about humanity. And basically what, to a person, the ancient philosophers recognized was the power of fear to motivate people. And that if you want people to do something, all you got to do is scare them, and they will behave in completely irrational fashion because you have scared them, and what you've triggered, and there's a scientific reason behind this. There's a thing called the amygdala that is the portion of our brain that goes all the way back to cavemen. And that was what saved us from being eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. It triggers the fight or flight syndrome. Well, we don't have natural predators today, but we still behave like cave people sometimes because someone will say something, we think they're trying to take something from me, they're trying to do something, they're going to hurt me in some fashion, and it triggers that natural animalistic impulse to react. And while maybe we don't run away or maybe we don't physically fight, our response emulates that behavior in some fashion. It could be aggression, it could be anger, it could be, some sort of rejection of truth, and it's natural, it's human, it's in our brain, but we have to fight it. And so I make the comparison of the aviator brain or the astronaut brain versus the caveman brain, because over time our frontal lobes advanced to the point that we could discern right from wrong, truth from fiction, danger from no danger. And yet, even today, sometimes, even though we may have advanced frontal lobes, we revert back to that instinctive impulse. So I quote, instead of, I've actually quoted a couple of ancient philosophers, but the one that gets the most attention is Yoda. Nobody cares about the ancient Greeks, but Yoda they listen to. And Yoda said in Star Wars that that ignorance leads to fear, or fear leads to ignorance, and fear then leads to anger, and anger leads to violence, and that cycle of ignorance, fear, anger, and violence, that's where we are in society. We're still blowing each other up with tanks. Think how anachronistic that is, that we have to resort to tank warfare out there. And if you go back to the root, somebody's afraid that somebody's going to take something, do something, and it triggers that cycle of fear and ignorance. And it's a way to control people. So the theory of the book is that we can solve all the problems of society if we recognize the power of knowledge to replace ignorance. And if you have knowledge, that leads to hope. And hope leads to understanding. And understanding leads to peace. So it basically takes that negative cycle of fear and violence and anger and turns it around and says, let's support people who are champions of hope and understanding, and let's not continue to follow those people who are purveyors of fear and anger and violence. And I know it sounds incredibly Pollyannish when I say that, But ultimately, it's the only solution for humanity to progress, because we've got ourselves into this loop of inertia, and we're not going to progress as a society unless we can figure out how to channel knowledge into hope and understanding.
Before you go, one of the things I want to commend you on here is your ability to communicate so simply, because a lot of times when people have been in positions like Jim has, they start using big words, and people get lost, and then the ego tells them they don't want to admit they got lost, and so people have gone on this long thing, and you lost everybody back there. Jim has a way of making sure everybody understands his points. And you even have a chapter in your book that's talking about the importance of the simplicity of message, and how where Einstein said, if you can't explain it simply, then you don't understand it. And in this room, we have a lot of decision makers and a lot of powerful people of influence. And I would love for you to, as we conclude, to explain why it's so important to speak in a way that everybody comprehends, and the power behind that, and what that's allowed you to do.
Sure, I'm gonna, I'll share with some of you sometime the origins of this, but it actually, the inspiration for this came from a dream that happened a long, long time ago. Shortly after being named CEO of 7-Eleven, and I had this dream about, oh my gosh, now what? And I wrote 3 words down on a piece of paper: change, confidence, and clarity. And I had no idea what that, I was supposed to get a gift in this dream, and I never got it. And I was all upset. I woke up Margot and I said, hey, I just had this amazing, I have to tell you about this dream. It was so powerful. Here's these 3 words. But darn it, I didn't get my gift. And she goes, duh, that is your gift. Why do you think you are where you are? How did you get to be CEO of 7-Eleven? How did you overcome those challenges as a child that you had? You have some incredible way of embracing change and turning negative into positive. You've got some weird level of confidence that you can do anything. It's just a matter of how much time and effort you put into it. And oh yeah, and by the way, you're not very smart, so you can take...
I didn't say that. I did not say that. I did not
So you can take very complex problems and break them into simple terms so that anyone can understand it.
Right.
And that you do this yourself so that you can understand things. Right. And so I've been calling that focus on simplicity, the algebra of thought. Because if you think about it, algebra, which we all hated as kids, wasn't to teach us math. It was to teach us to solve problems, because we had to break that long problem into pieces. And first you solve for inside the parentheses, 2 plus 2 in the parentheses. Okay, 4. Now, then, and I can never remember what you do next either. But that's all problems represent. They represent this big hairball that just is intimidating and frightening.
Yes.
And yet if we can break it into its pieces, it's not as scary. We can overcome fear. We can have the confidence then to do something about it. And it's all about simplicity. So there's 2 kinds of clarity that I talk about in the book. One is, I got from Mark Cuban, actually. He somehow had a mentor one day that said, Mark, you don't listen to anybody. You gotta stop that. And you'll never be successful until you learn to listen. He said, I want you to write down every time you go into a meeting on a piece of paper, listen. And Mark said he does it to this day, that he puts listen on a piece of paper, and then that forces them to actually absorb, because we all get caught up in coming up with the answer before we even hear the question.
Yes.
We're responding, right? Before we even comprehend what the other person is saying, or we're debating, we're arguing. And so he says, listen. And so that inbound communication is critically important, to understand what someone is saying. And then outbound, you can't lead if somebody can't understand what you're trying to tell them. So you've got to be able, as Mary Ann said, Einstein has this beautiful quote: if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it well enough yourself. Right? And so so those are the 3 elements. And by the way, that thing that I got in a dream, that was an inspiration to me, and I've been teaching it ever since. It's kind of the foundational premise of the book. It's the what to learn, change, confidence, and clarity. I've been now trying to learn social media, so I'm in this whole new world. I had 0 followers
2 months ago.
Don't
3
say
months
that, I
ago.
follow you.
Now you do. Now you do. Well, you followed me way back when I had like 90 followers or something. Now I have 15,000, which is kind of cool in only 3 months. But I have one video, and all that happened is this young man put a microphone in front of my face and said, "What is the key to really finding success?" And I said, "Well, I'll share with you the 3 things that work for me. Change equals opportunity. So change, confidence, and clarity." That video now has 35 million views.
Wow.
And I'm getting calls from China, from India, from
Dubai.
Saudi Arabia, Dubai, all these people asking, tell me more, because they agree that that's a very simple but elegant solution to success that ends up being the obstacle to so many.
Thank you. And while, it can be applied to individual life, I think there's such a beautiful message in the book that can be applied to everything we're seeing in the world right now. We're being forced between our economic systems, our ecological systems, and our sociological systems to deal with a whole lot of change as a species. And to find the opportunities in there is extraordinary. So I'm glad that there's someone like you at the helm of the things that you're doing for our world right now, because we need that. We need it desperately. Before we conclude, is there anything that you would really like to emphasize?
What I'd love everybody to do is help me spread the word. I do have a gift for you tonight. Usually when I do these, I bring someone along and we sell books. What I'd like to do tonight is give you each a book to take with you, but I've got a request. I told Mary Ann, I'm an old retailer, so I think of BOGOs, buy one, get one. But this is a go-go, so it's get one, give one. So I'm gonna ask you to either give this one away after you read it, or keep this one, because I'm gonna sign them. If you want to stick around, let me sign them. And buy one that you can give to someone else, because what I really want to do is spread the word. Denny, I'm grateful for the opportunity tomorrow to talk to you folks, and I just want to get the word out there of how important this is for young people, for people early in their career, entrepreneurs, or those of us in the last chapter, to be able to use learning to have a richer life for the rest of our life. It's all there. It's right at our fingertips. So I hope you'll enjoy the book, and thank you for the opportunity, Mary.
Thank everyone for being here, and all the books are in the kitchen, so please come join us there. Jim will be signing the books. Appreciate it.
Good job.